Donny McCaslin, how you doing?
Ron Wallace, I'm better now that I'm in your presence.
Ah, well, you stole my line. That's what I was gonna say. Now I don't know what I'm gonna say now. But we were just talking a little bit before we started rolling, just about how kind of jarring all of this sort of current events have been.
Yes.
We back in March, we kind of started with this big, the quarantine, and the coronavirus, and all of this kind of questions about, what is. I mean, we had really no idea. We had no medical information really about what was going on. And, we made these adjustments. All of our gigs got canceled like simultaneously and it's been really devastating to the livelihood of musicians in particular. But like, waitresses and waiters and people that work at restaurants and all kinds of stuff has just been totally smashed. I don't feel like the media or the news has done a particularly good job of covering how, just the kind of devastation that's been for musicians, and how long it takes to like build up like momentum in your career to have it just smashed to a halt so quickly, like overnight. And then we went right out of that right into like full scale racial riots and protesting, and it's just a lot of like stuff going on right now. And yeah. So how are you feeling about things, and how are you adjusting, and how are you kind of maybe making the most of maybe some additional time that you have now?
Yeah, well, there's so much there, to unravel. I guess I'll start with my own, life, and it has been a big change. I'm used to just sort of constantly being in motion, and had the good fortune to perform a lot, and of course all that has stopped. And in my situation, I do have children, and my wife has been able to continue to work through the pandemic. So she's a therapist, so she's been busy, and so I have really I was immediately kind of into parenting for the most part, and trying to manage my kids' online school situation. And the school they go to has done just a tremendous job of transitioning. But I needed to be there to help with IT things, and all the help manage homework and all that. So I've been busy doing that, and then I think initially, it felt like, oh, here's this opportunity that I've wanted to really write a lot of music, and I had gotten a commission to do something for the Metropole Orchestra, and I
Oh,
was
wow.
in the process of that when this happened. And then, that kind of went into writing, tunes for different kind of projects I have in mind. So I had a good stretch where I felt really focused, and with the time I did have to work on music, it felt really focused there for a while, and because it's just been so long since I'd had so much time to work on things. And even though I was parenting a lot, I wasn't being pulled in 15 other directions outside
Yeah.
of. So for initially it was good, and one of the byproducts of that was having time to listen to music more, which has been great. And then as it goes with those things, I kind of hit a bit of a dry period, and just sort of since then, sort of and forth, where I have periods where I'm, feeling like I'm productive and have things that I'm working towards, and then other periods where it feels like not so much, and I'm really missing the connection with people. I think part of what we do, as improvisers, so much of it is in community and connection with other musicians, and I heartily miss that. I have to say, like, I don't want to develop, a 3-hour solo saxophone concert, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not, for me, my focus is a little more around, playing with people and playing off people and all that. So I really do miss that. And I've had a good fortune to have a couple or maybe 3 recording projects come up that are, tune here, tune here, tune here, that's giving me some focus on playing wise. And then I've been able to get into the studio and to record. And that's been, great when that happened. And it was, kind of a thrill to get back in the heat of the action, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, but now I'm back into a period of trying to, write and finish up these different things that are in different stages of development. And my kids are on summer break, so, like today, I was up and getting them breakfast, and then we jump in the car and we met these other people in our COVID pod, another family. We did this hike and got down to a river and spent a couple of hours in the river, and then got back, got them lunch, got the horn out, for a minute, got on the, it's just kind of one thing after. So, but anyway, with that side of things, I feel I'm just fortunate, that my wife is still working, because if it was just my income, so to speak, it would be completely devastating, to our day in and day out well-being. So, I think about musicians who are really, really getting hammered by this, and it's heartbreaking. So, so part of the thing for me, it's processing, looking at the news every day, and, wondering, I think for all of us, all of us, have this sense of like, oh, okay, everything in May is canceled, and okay, now everything in April, and then now it's June, and then you just kind of assume, well, the whole summer's going to go by the wayside.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of mourning, of like, shoot, and then you get into the fall, scheduling stuff, and that starts to fall by the wayside. And then, I'm talking to my agent, for example, and, just getting a sense of what he's hearing. And he's hearing different things. He's talking to performing arts centers, he's talking to clubs, festivals, and, he's saying, well, there could be some one-offs that start to happen, but in terms of real sustained touring, you're looking at a year and a half, and that's unprecedented, of course.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, I'm looking at the news, and I'm looking for, signs of hope in terms of the vaccine or whatever. And like all of us, just, it's unsettling to see how, the curve was flattened, and then of course how it's coming back. And then there's, really just kind of, in my eyes, a real failure of leadership in the country in terms of how they're dealing with this, so it's disheartening. And then, the George Floyd, murder, and Breonna Taylor, and it's to me, slavery is like the original sin, of our country. And I've heard people use that expression, so I'm just borrowing. And I think the thing to me that has been heartbreaking is to see how, well, in my eyes, how it's, there's never been a true reckoning. It's just the legacy of that has had such a devastating effect on the African American community. Through my perspective, it's just my opinion, but it's just heartbreaking, and I feel like it just has to stop. And so on one, all the violence and the murders, it's beyond heartbreaking. And it just pushes a real deep button in me, because I just feel like America's been like.
I trust that you've enjoyed the video so far.
please subscribe, comment, share, like. And also, you can go over to my Patreon. The link is in the description if you'd like to further support. Thank you. Now back to the video.
I feel like America's been like a racist country for a long time. And not, that's a heavy word to use. And maybe what I'm trying to say is, the institutional racism that still exists to this day, I just like, it's just not right. And so I feel like I'm hoping that the momentum of the protests continue, and this could be a real time of reckoning, and not just, well, there was more people at the protest because of COVID and more people were home, more people come out and protest, but it peters away, and then kind of things just stay in place. Like, my hope is that there will be new leadership on the different levels of government in our country that could make real change. And it's so complex. It's more than I could probably understand how to really get to the root of it, because it's taken such deep hold, from what I can tell, and so I don't know. I'm just hoping that this reckoning will happen, and that somehow it can really move to a place where it ends.
Well, it's interesting because okay, so I'm a realist, and we've had periods of time in our history. We've had protests following sort of similar, eerily similar sometimes, sorts of events. And what has happened in the history outside of the civil rights movement, what has happened is there will be a lot of energy associated with the protests, and there will be some more conversations that it's like people are more willing to have. But then it sort of peters out, and then basically we go back to sort of a status quo. And what people are telling me, folks that I've interviewed in this series, when I talk to my dad, about this, what they're saying is that there seems to be something different about this. There seems to be maybe something that's going to last, a lasting. There's some aspect of this, something mystical about this that just seems like it's a different time, and maybe something really will change, something significant, something deep. One thing that I have some challenges with is these sort of okay, so social media, pop culture, trends, and all of these kind of things. And if you're like me at all, a lot of those things when I was a kid, well, social media didn't exist, but certainly pop culture in trends, that stuff did exist. But I was so sort of possessed with the saxophone and studying music that was not popular music, and really into that music because it was like truly countercultural. It truly was, different than what maybe other kids were doing at my age or something. It was something that truly was different, right? Yeah. Okay, so the whole pop culture trend and all of that stuff, the way that seems to manifest sometimes in these situations is a lot of sort of acts of solidarity. So things like people blacking out their profile on their Facebook or those kinds of things. And I understand that people want to do something and they want to appear as though they're with, that movement. They support what is going on. What I'm afraid of is that the sort of trendiness of saying the right things and being willing to have a certain conversation supplants actually making changes and actually people individually taking a personal responsibility and a personal stake in making these changes. And part of what has to continue to happen is conversations. Conversations like these where it's okay to bring up those topics and it's not so sort of taboo or or just kind of undesired conversation that we can actually maybe move something forward.
Yeah, exactly. That people will shy away from, instead, not wanting to talk about politics or something.
Yeah.
Point. With this, I'm having this memory now. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and it was very, just very white. And there was a Hispanic community kind of on Santa Cruz and Watsonville and stuff. But looking on the beach, it was mostly white kids. And anyway, I went to college and, I was on the road. One of my early-ish road experiences in the early 90s was with Steps Ahead. So on the road, and I was hanging out with Clarence Penn, who's I've known for many years, great drummer, and Reggie Washington, a great bass player. And, they both happen to be African American. So we're we're in Poland, we're in Warsaw, and we're walking down the street. And people are just or some people, just staring at Reggie and Clarence. Not in a, it wasn't I feared that we were going to get attacked, or it wasn't like that kind of thing, but it was just staring at them. And it just, I had never, growing up in this kind of white culture, I had never, and, white privilege, I had never, it never even occurred. And I, of course, my heroes are all African-American men, John Coltrane, Duke Ellington, Sonny Rollins, all that. So, but this is my first time where I was walking with these friends of mine. We're just hanging. And then I was like, oh my gosh, and I think I said something to Clarence, have you experienced? He's like, yeah, are you, of course, happens to me all the time as a black man, the spirit of what he said was yeah, people staring at me he'd been touring with Betty Carter and, so I guess, just to unpack that a little more, just to be in his shoes, to be in their shoes, it's something I could never, I can't imagine that kind of, that those experiences happening over and over, and then adding in people vibing you because of your race and stuff, and as a white person, I never had to deal with that, and then I don't know, I was sort of confronted with just a tiny crack of the window of what it must be like, and not even in a negative way. It was just people were really noticing them, and I just thought, holy cow, this is I read about what it was like for Duke Ellington touring and, all that stuff, that it was shocking is all, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And then I don't know, it's just so much easier being white. I don't mean that.
Well,
but yeah, to deal with all of that kind of stuff and navigate that kind of playing field. And especially when you're an artist, and you're sensitive, and I'm just throwing things out here, but sort of stream of conscious, but I just, that kind of, it's just unbelievable to me.
It's an interesting sort of, the privilege conversation is an interesting conversation. So because we're all individuals, and what is it? The smallest minority is the individual, so to speak. So all of us have a unique perspective and have unique struggles, and in that way, it's probably going to be almost impossible for us to truly understand another person's struggles, what they deal with. Yeah. But I think what's important is that we're all willing to at least listen,
Yeah.
And I think if we're willing to listen, then maybe there's an opportunity for us to learn something and actually enrich our own lives, because I think we need each other. People need each other. You were talking about writing music, and you were you were pretty focused on writing music, and then maybe not as focused for periods of time. And if you're anything like me, my writing is heavily dependent on the relationships that I have with people, the musicians that I play with. I'm very influenced by, if I'm playing with certain musicians on a regular, I just hear things when I'm thinking about writing. I hear things, and it's not devoid of the people that will play those parts. It's actually integrates those players. I'm considering them as I'm writing. Matter of fact, in many ways, I was influenced and inspired by them to write. And so for me, in my writing, if I don't have that certain kind of give and take in back and forth with the musicians, other musicians, then it can, I can, I always have some kind of melodies going around in my head, but it's just not the same. It's hard. It's almost like trying to pull from, pull out of a vacuum or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I agree, because it's like I'm at a sound check and we're just jamming and guys are playing stuff, and I just turn on my phone and just record, and I don't even necessarily maybe even transcribe exactly what they played and start writing a tune off it, but just I'll listen to that stuff and it'll kind of help, so to speak. Or and I'm sure you've had this experience where you're playing and something happens and it's really compelling and you remember it. Think man, yeah, I want to write something kind of based on that feeling or something like that. So that I definitely experienced that, and I think that period I had of real focus right when the first couple months, I was still just mining all these experiences that had kind of recently happened, and then that kind of ran out, and then it was back to what do I listen to get going here, and try to get the inspiration out of me.
So I'm going to tell you, Donny, probably the two modern and living saxophone players that in my adult life, maybe since I've been, I don't know, I'm 45. So maybe since I don't know, maybe for the last 10 years, I'll say, I know that I was an adult before that. Hopefully I was. But maybe for the last 10 years, it have been Chris Potter and you.
Oh, man.
And your writing in particular, we in the Ohio Jazz Tet, which is the Ohio State faculty group. We've played a few of your your compositions, which are always very challenging. I have to play I have to play what you played, so it's always challenging for me, and it's always so intricate and free and rhythmic and interesting, but then also, I feel like I understand the aesthetic that it comes from. I identify with that aesthetic. It's from the tradition, but it's informed by, just a lot of like popular music and a lot of developments that have happened in music. It's like I hear that in your music, and in your control of your instrument is quite astounding. I mean, you have great altissimo control, and not just the sort of you have fluidity, is what I want to say. Fluidity all the way up in the range and all the way down, and it's very it's inspiring. I mean, you're a fine player, and you've been very, like I said, very influential to me, inspiring, and thank you for. Thanks for being you.
I appreciate that, and I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think the idea with the fluidity, just came from being just so inspired by John Coltrane when I was young, and I think also when I got a little bit older, Michael Brecker and stuff, but there's just something about the way that Train played with that sort of emotional intensity, that sense of like, it's like a spirituality, the way he played it, such a vibe, and then it was just incredible, control of the instrument. And so I think from a young age, I always thought, well, as a kid, I thought, well, I want to be better than John Coltrane, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. And of course I realized that that's never going to happen. And about being, the best, your best self in expressing yourself, and all that. And I eventually matured into that. But I guess my point is that, from a young age, that was always what I shot for. I was shooting for having that kind of fluidity, because I thought this is how I want to. I don't want to have any limitations on how I'm able to express myself. And when I get out there and I'm improvising, I just do want it to be as stream of consciousness sort of playing as possible, and not hindered, by the instrument. So, I practiced a lot of things that helped me to, I took an overall approach of always trying to work things through the instrument, so I was really touching on all those, the altissimo register, all the different registers, and I was just moving through the horn with that overriding goal in mind. So for many years, it was something that I thought about, and it wasn't that I wanted to be like a technician, or it wasn't that, or I wanted to play giant steps at quarter note equals 400 or something. It was just more that, like, I don't want limitations on what I can hopefully imagine as a player, and it's the altissimo is a good example. I mean, it was if we can just slide a little bit into being, specific about the saxophone, for a while when I was doing it, I was kind of biting with my lower lip, and it was a way I could kind of squeeze out these altissimo notes that I couldn't really hit with a more relaxed embouchure. But I started studying with Joe Viola when I was a freshman at Berklee College of Music. I think I studied with him for a couple of years, and he really, in the first lesson or two, just completely changed my embouchure to this approach where there's not much tension. And the idea is to not be tense at all, so that you are just kind of free blowing and not biting with the lower lip, and the upper teeth are resting on the top of the mouthpiece, and you just have the sense of you're trying not to bite, and you're trying not to create stress in your body, and especially in the embouchure. And so once I kind of embraced that, it helped me to just slowly get the altissimo register happening. But it wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. I practiced, this one exercise and really hooked it up. It was just this process of like, okay, I got to find fingerings that feel cohesive, that don't feel too, too hard to execute at a rapid tempo. And then it was like working on all these different things, scales or intervals or melodies or patterns or whatever, but to always taking it through the full range of the instrument, and just like day by day, hour by hour, and eventually getting just more and more facility there. But it was really a process, And then trying to stay, the natural tendency as a saxophone player is to want to, I think, bite when you get and so just constantly trying to reinforce not giving into that, and trying to trust the breath, staying relaxed, maybe playing intensely, but still trying to keep the arms and this as relaxed as possible. So anyway.
Yeah. So, the biting instinct. So the reason for biting is to speed the air up. So if you're not going to bite, then you have to generate more airspeed.
Okay.
And a different way, right? Which is totally possible. I mean, more of diaphragmatic pressure, that's a way to do it. Different vowel sounds, like A, E, I, O, E, E. I mean, if you think more of an E kind of sound, you can speed the air up that way. There's a variety of different things that we can do, but it seems like the most instinctual, like like if we don't think about it, that biting seems like to be the first thing that I think most young players go to. That's an interesting thing, because if you're biting in order to get the altissimo notes to come out, there's no way that you're going to have the kind of fluidity that you have, because you can play from anywhere in the range up there, and it's just effortless. It's just jumping out. And if you had to sort of reset your embouchure every time you kept going back down, you'd be in trouble. I mean.
Yeah, and that's where Joe Viola's embouchure concept really helped me out, because it was, I think prior to that I was trying to keep my jaw straight, and I had some tension happening, and I guess I was adjusting from octave to octave. It was just kind of messy, and the thing was just like one embouchure for the whole instrument. And that really just, and it doesn't, and this can move, and it's, don't worry about any of that. And so I just kind of ran with that, and it really was helpful.
Okay, so how old are your kids? I did want to ask you about your family. We sort of jumped into the middle of the conversation, and then now we're sort of backing up.
My daughter's 11, and my son is 8, and he's going to be 9 in about a month. So they're great ages. My daughter is kind of entering the teenage thing. I mean, she's only 11, but she's she's growing a lot and changing, and my son is he's great. They're both great. Yeah, I'm really fortunate. Um,
So, but you know, as far as how your family's doing, everybody's healthy.
oh yeah,
Um,
I
you
mean,
know,
my father is probably ending the is nearing the end of his
mm,
life, but he's 93 and a half, and he's had a great life, filled with a lot of music. He's a musician, and a lot of great things. But it's not a COVID related thing,
right.
and it's the life cycle. But everybody else in my family, and thank you for asking, is healthy so far, and we've been able to stay relatively isolated, and we live in Brooklyn, but a couple months ago we drove down to Georgia where my in-laws live, uh,
Mm,
so that we could have access, more easy access to nature. When living in Brooklyn, um, we would go outside every day for a walk, but there's a sort of fixed amount of sidewalk, and a lot of
right.
density. And then, as you can imagine, on a nice day when you go to the park, we live pretty close to Prospect Park, but it was just like a sea of humanity, and it was stressful, because not everybody's wearing masks and all that, and
Right.
I can see the toll on my kids. Psychologically, they were a little stressed. They were not a little stressed. They were stressed about going outside. So being down here, it's a more of a suburban environment. So it's just a lot easier to distance appropriately, and
Mm.
the kids are much happier having their space. So we're real fortunate to be down here, and we've been healthy, and so we're doing well. Thanks. How about you, Sean? How's everybody?
Yeah, my family's doing well. My parents are are well. My dad has. So I started this. I moved back to Columbus. So I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and but I had my sixth birthday in the house that my parents still live in Eaton Rapids, Michigan,
Mm.
where I grew up and did all my K through 12, and that's grew up on a dirt road, and it's still a dirt road, and it was out in the country, horses and four wheelers and go karts and all that kind of stuff, and big cow pasture behind our house. So that's where my parents still live there,
Mm.
and my dad, he's been retired since before I moved back to Columbus in 2004. And he just does what he wants to do, which is a lot of riding horses and all of that kind of stuff. One thing that I missed a lot about the quarantine was going to the gym. I'm a 5 days a week kind of guy. I have some goals associated with training, and I have some buddies that go to my gym, and there's a tremendous kind of stress relief that I get from working out. So I miss that a lot, and I remember talking to my dad, because my dad is the reason why I work out, because he had me doing push-ups and set-ups. All of his kids, push-ups and set-ups, and some other calisthenics before we went to bed every night. Started very young. I think I started doing that when I was 6 or something, five or six or something. And I remember having a conversation with my dad where, I'm going to the gym 5 days a week. I'm I'm saying, hey, Dad, I've been going to the gym 5 days a week. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. I go 6 days. It's like, yeah, I can't beat you in anything, man. You win in everything. Why do I even? So that's just how he is. They're very. I told you all of that story to get to that. But they're very self-reliant and everything, and they live out in the country, so it's pretty easy for them to socially distance. And so that's been that's actually given me some peace with all of this going on. Yeah, but okay. So I wanted to ask you about. So the one thing that you mentioned. So you said that your son is 8. You said he's going to turn 9.
Yeah.
So I have a son, and he's 6, and he just finished kindergarten. And the last 5 weeks or so, 6 or 7 weeks of kindergarten was the homeschooled, right? Like, I mean, I think this is, you were mentioning this or something like this. how I went to college. How is it possible that I can't figure out how to do kindergarten homework? I don't know what's up with that. It's like really, it's like the way that they ask the questions or something. Like, are you trying to make it difficult to understand? Why don't I know what you're talking about?
It's changed. I find it, with especially with the math, the way that they ask the questions is much different from how I learned it. Even my son, we were doing a couple of math sheets last week for the summer work kind of thing, and they asked a geometry question, and I was thinking like, damn, I have no idea what this is. Why don't you just look at that? And I pull out my phone. I'm like, right.
Yeah, right.
Man, son figured it out without Google, and I thought, sheesh, he's already more advanced with geometry than I am. It is different, and so I'm just hanging in there as long as I can with
There's a show. Well, I don't know if the show's on the air anymore. It might be. I think it's Smarter Than a Fifth Grader.
I don't know this.
Oh, okay. So what it is? So they have adults that are competing against 5th grade kids, and they're asking a bunch of 5th grade level questions. And it is pretty often that the 5th grader wins. So I actually have a buddy. I actually interviewed him for this series. His name is T.K. Coleman, and he actually won that show. He actually won.
Nice.
Yeah. That's right. That's like that's right. The adults finally win one. But yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit about growing up and maybe the music that was happening around your house? When the saxophone really became the thing, and then like when you knew that this was going to be the career. I mean, maybe talk about some mentor figures that you had, and
yeah. What it was for me was my parents were divorced, and my dad would pick me up every Sunday morning and drive me downtown in Santa Cruz, California, down to the Pacific Garden Mall, which was right in the center of town, and there was an old courthouse that had been converted into shops and a restaurant and a bar, and there was a bandstand outside, in the front of this building, and it was adjacent to the outdoor mall. So they would set up in the morning. I would help my father set up, and he had a Wurlitzer piano, a marimba, and a vibraphone, and some percussion instruments. And so I'd help him set up, and then I would sit there. He had like a chair, and I would just sit on the bandstand and listen. And they play like noon until 5 p.m. roughly. And of course, it was weather permitting, but it was a really kind of a festive scene because I was sitting on the bandstand and people were walking along the mall, and a lot of them were stopped and listening, and people are dancing. It's kind of the hippie culture was very, very strong in Santa Cruz when I was growing up. So there was that dynamic, and so I was exposed to this music that was a combination of like Great American Songbook standards, and there were singers in the band, and there was like a couple horn players, percussion player, and people always sitting in, and they would kind of vacillate between Great American Songbook music and then like Cal Tjader-esque Latin jazz, because my dad was playing vibraphone, and he played a lot of Cal Tjader tunes. So they played those tunes and have long solo vamps, and people would play. And then they played kind of like R&B-ish tunes like Mustang Sally, Feel Like Making Love, tunes like that. So that was kind of what I grew up hearing. And like most probably young California surf town people, I was listening to the Beach Boys. I was listening to Chuck Berry initially. That was like what really kind of captured my imagination. Musically was Chuck Berry. In fact, I had a leather jacket. I had gotten one, and a kid played this Chuck Berry record, and I traded him my leather jacket for the Chuck Berry LP.
That's a great story, man.
So I was like, okay, that looking back on that, clearly music had a hold on me at an early age.
Yeah.
It was Chuck Berry. I guess actually I was really John Philip Sousa first that I listened to, and I was really captivated by that. Then it was Chuck Berry, which was just like mind altering, and then then it was like the Beach Boys, and then like AC/DC, and then I was 12 years old and made an impulsive decision to start playing music, get into beginning orchestra in junior high school, and that was when my dad asked me, what instrument do you want to play? And I said saxophone, tenor sax. And looking back on it, the reason was there was a guy in his band that I had grown up seeing all these Sundays. And what I left out of that was he had a tenor sax player named Leslie Braxton, who was really a colorful, player. He often wore tie-dye, T-shirts, and would play these kind of solos that, were kind of wild, and squeaking, and, he played these long solos on vamps, and sometimes it would have that feeling where people would be dancing, as I mentioned, on the street, and just it would be charismatic. It was charismatic, and I think I was attracted to that. And I remember looking into the bell of his saxophone one time, and it was just this pool of condensation with a cigarette butt floating in the middle of it. Wow, it's kind of gross, But at the time, it's so cool, So I think he really kind of captivated my imagination, and so when that decision happened, I chose that instrument, and I think the hindsight was that. And then, but immediately my father set me up with lessons with a sax player who was with his band at that time, whose name is Brad Hecht, and he's a wonderful player, still lives in Santa Cruz, and so I started studying with Brad, and Brad was great because I was just a total beginner, and he had total patience for me. And every lesson, he gave me 2 records to listen to take home, So I remember like Motion, Lee Conant's, Cannonball, Mercy, 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 Brecker Brothers, Heavy Metal Bebop, or 3, the Instant Tower of Power, I remember. So, so I was getting it from him, and then I've been playing a short time, and I went to a Gene Aebersold camp. I was probably in the lowest rated combo ever put together at an Aebersold camp. I was such a total beginner. But, at the Aebersold camps, they had a record store, and so I bought all this vinyl, Coltrane records, for really, a reasonable price. So I just I just hung in there, and I got into, I was playing in beginning orchestra in school, and things just kind of, I guess the main thing was, when I started Sean, that I was kind of dedicated from the beginning. It wasn't
Mm.
that I started and I was playing once a week, or there was none of that. Like once I started, I think I was playing pretty consistently because I lived in the country, outside of Santa Cruz with my mom, and she was with somebody at that time, and I didn't have a lot going on in my life, and it wasn't a very, uh, it wasn't a good situation where I lived, So I think a lot of the emotional turmoil that was happening for me that I couldn't really express, I was able to focus it towards music, music and
Yeah.
sports. But music really became kind of like my emotional outlet, and kind of from the beginning, even though I could barely play, like the draw of improvisation and this idea of catharsis that can happen when you're playing, which hardly ever happened to me when I was pretty young because I was, struggling. But somehow that whole thing drew me in,
Mm.
and so I was playing consistently. So that was 12, and by the time I was 14, I started. I went to a different high school out of my district that had a tremendous jazz band program, tremendous. And I started studying with a guy who had played with my father's band, years and years prior, and so just things I just kind of got informed, kept getting more information, and things kind of kept moving ahead, and I just was practicing. I got into this great high school jazz band. I think I was like the only freshman that first year, and the guys were really good, and they were playing. My high school band director had been friends with Bill Berry, who was a trumpet player who had been in Duke Ellington's band. And he gave my high school band director, Don Keller, he gave him all these Ellington charts at a time where they weren't available for high school or college bands, really. So not 4 days a week, we would play Ellington charts in my high school.
Oh wow.
I mean, it was unbelievable. It's one of those things like I read that Malcolm Gladwell book, The Outliers.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a great book.
So it was kind of one of those situations because I was in this incredible high school jazz band uh, program that had history, and it was very serious. And then my father's band is playing like 4 to 6 days a week at this outdoor place, the Cooper House, and then he's also playing at night at a restaurant called the 2525, like 5 or 6 nights, which my dad's playing all the time. So once I get a little older, I'm able to access that. And then there's a great junior college program at Cabrillo College, the trumpet player Ray Brown, and teaching there, and Lyle Cruz, a great educator. So I got sort of dialed into that. And then the Kawumba Jazz Center opened in 1976 when I was 12 years old. So, I mentioned starting to play at 12. Well, at some point that year, I went to see my first jazz concert outside of seeing my father, and it was Elvin Jones and the Jazz Machine. And for the first 15 seconds, I was completely lost. But I was hearing Pat LaBarbera and Elvin Jones and Andy Sin. It was just, and then a couple weeks later, I heard McCoy's band, with Gary Bartz, and so I had access. And I had the opportunity to play a lot, and I struggled, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I was. It wasn't like it happened like that for me. I didn't feel like I was touched with the gilded, hard work. And I was, so I was really fortunate. And then there was other guys my age who were really great. Kenny Wallison, great drummer who's played for years with Bill Frisell. He plays in Sex Mob, this great band. He's done a lot of stuff. Like Kenny was the same age as me. Went to the same junior high school. He transferred over my high school sophomore year. He living in New York. He's living in New York City now. Like a great, totally in-demand drummer. Plays with John Zorn a lot, and a lot of other folks too. So I was really, I was in a good generation, and with all these different kind of things happening, well, opportunities to play. And I got into a salsa band as a teenager and a reggae band and this and that. Paul Jackson, who played bass in the Headhunters, was living in Santa Cruz at the time. He had a weekly gig, and somehow I ended up in his band as like a 16 or 17-year-old for 6 months, and it was all incredible. So I was really fortunate, to have that kind of environment to get started in, and it really kind of all that experience really helped me out, over the years. I have to say.
So, can you talk a little bit about? I mean, you've had a great career. I mean, you've played with everybody, and you have an extensive discography, both as a sideman, recordings, your own projects and things, which are always terrific projects. The writing is great. The sort of stream of consciousness and the conception of them, it's always well schemed, and it's just beautiful music. So, I mean, if you had to maybe isolate a few either bands that you played in or experiences that you had on the bandstand where maybe it was like what you might think heaven would be like.
Yeah. Well, I know one comes to mind is my first real big gig was playing in Gary Burton's group, and it started in earnest when I was a senior at Berkeley and started touring with him. And it was it was daunting because it was hard music and it was a struggle, but there was a gig early on. Well, somewhere I was in his band for maybe 2.5 years or 3 years, something like that. But somewhere in the middle there, we played a gig at the Montreal Jazz Festival, and the band was going to do like a week-long cross Canada tour, but I got the chicken pox, and so I was laid up in my apartment in Boston. I missed, the whole tour except for the last day in Montreal. So I was well enough. I flew up, and we played. And Pat Metheny was like a special guest, and it was a transcendent gig. I mean, Pat was amazing, and everybody in the band, I think, really, everybody was really connected, and it was just so exciting. That's one that comes to mind. I mean, great gigs with Gary's band when I was in it, but that one really sticks out because it was just that sense of oneness with the music, and the audience was totally in it, and it was in a great venue in Montreal, and that was probably my first time ever going to Montreal, and that's a city that I've ended up having a long relationship with, and a lot of incredible musical experiences there with different groups, and I love that city dearly. So that certainly comes to mind. That Gary Burton quintet with Pat Metheny at the Montreal Jazz Festival. Then a big thing for me was finding this crew in New York: David Binney, alto saxophone composer; Scott Colley on bass; Jeff Hirschfield on drums; and then Kenny Wallison eventually on drums. And we had this collective group called Lan Zhang, and we did some touring in the States and in Canada, and that was an incredible experience because we were all writing for the band and workshopping music, and we were getting together multiple times per week to work on music. And I never, since high school, I'd never had that experience of playing with people so regularly, and all these guys, really pushing the envelope with their music and digging deep. So I felt like that was a really a great formative experience for me. And there was gigs with that band that also just felt so totally connected, that it just felt transcendent. I think another experience was playing with Danilo Perez, who I went to college with at Berkeley. We were dorm mates, on the same floor of the dorm, and we played a fair amount together at Berkeley, but then in the early 2000s, he had this Motherland. He did a record called Motherland, and I was in the touring band for that, and that was unbelievable because it was just this deep dive into folkloric rhythms of the Americas,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just a master musician who, is able to, deal with all this harmony, but all this rhythm, and is a great educator and really, really great at articulating and talking about these different traditions. So, man, that was like it just changed my life playing in that band and being close to him for that run. It might have been a couple years or a year and a half, but it was just like it was just so inspiring, and I was just learning so much about rhythm and about uh, music and life. It was just the best, So that's something that really really stands out to me, and I'll give you a couple more. I think I've been playing with Maria Schneider's band for a while now, and in the beginning, she had gotten commissioned by Jazz at Lincoln Center to write a piece, and it was called Bulleria, Solia, and Rumba, and it was this long epic piece. I think it's maybe 20 minutes long or something, but I have this really long solo in the middle of it, and it was when I first joined the band. I've been subbing, over the years, but when I first joined the band and we started working on that, and um, when we recorded that and really were performing it, there was some real moments where it felt like really transcendent because it was a challenge. It was something that was really long and slow, and the band would gradually, speed up, but there was these really kind of background. So there's a lot of the momentum of how to build the solo was on me, and it was really an incredible experience to play in front of that kind of writing. Her writing is just, it's amazing, and I think I'm just such a fan of Miles Davis and Gil Evans and those collaborations. Miles Ahead, Sketches of Spain, and Porgy and Bess, and so really playing with her, and for the kind of like with this huge solo bit and having that kind of writing and performing behind me was it just felt like it really elevated my consciousness, and it was such a great challenge, and it just made me think about Miles Davis and Gil Evans, and I love those guys so much, and to have that kind of experience was really tremendous. And then I guess there's a lot of others I can mention, but I think the last thing I would say that really stands out to me right now is working with David Bowie on Black Star. And it was through Maria that connection happened, and that I just it just was a life-changing experience, and you know a big part of that was that it was so affirming. He really trusted us, and kind of gave us free reign to do whatever we wanted to do in the studio, and we were playing this music that was great already, and we didn't need to kind of reinvent the wheel at all with it, but just to have that kind of focused, intense experience that was on such a high level creatively, and to have it work out so well artistically was really 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 affirming, because it really affirmed a lot of the ideals that I've striven for throughout my life, which is like trying to be really present in every moment as a musician and as an improviser, to be utterly present, to not be afraid to take chances, and to not worry to worry about what the music will be categorized as, but to really give yourself over to being honest as you can about what your musical vision is, and trying to have the courage to just move forward with that, even despite whatever emotions might come up around that, but just to like forge ahead, with what you believe in. And so that was a deeply affirming experience that I carry with me to this day.
Yeah, it seems to me that I mean, that's the kind of music that I'm interested in hearing.
Mm.
It's the music that is unafraid. It's sort of, it is influenced by what's in the ether and from the tradition, but it's not defined by it. You're improvising. Your rhythmic concept strikes me as being related to the time, in the time, but also liberated from it. And yeah, I mean, you're the man. I mean, you're the guy. I mean,
You know, I appreciate that, and I just would say that I work hard at it and worked hard at um, working on rhythms that felt foundational, and for me, it's getting into Afro-Cuban folkloric music, and really trying to um, understand that language and understand the rhythmic language, that came from Africa and how it changed. And I'm not an ethnomusicologist, and there's a lot deeper that I could have gone, but I spent a lot of time, a certain period of my life, around the time when I was playing with Danilo, studying the folkloric, as I mentioned earlier, the folkloric rhythms of the Americas, but really the focus was Afro-Cuban, and then how, the African rhythms, interacted as they moved. And so I thought if I could connect with that and have that be a foundational element of my music, then that maybe could give me the freedom to get away from it and to interact with it, creating kind of tension and release, with having with it, but needing that strong foundation to be able to do it. So I spent a lot of time working on it, and it really was helpful, and it was liberating.
So talk to us about. I mean, you said that you're doing some, or that you did some during this time period. This sort of this nebulous zone that we're in right now. That you got in the studio.
Yeah. I'm working on a piece. Actually, it's around what we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. It's the idea of reckoning, and reckoning for, for the sin, the original sin of our country, and how it, and because it's been able to persist in these different manifestations, and they are negative in my eye. And so I, basically wrote a piece around that, and have been recording it, and we're pretty close to the end. In fact, before we got on this, I was texting with Ben Rubin, who's producing this and writing it with me, and just listening to the first mix, and it sounds great, and we're almost there. So that's been a real focus, that piece. And the energy of that, there's a lot of sort of rage, that I feel just about the social justice aspect, the lack of social justice, and the rage that I feel about that. But there's also some hope in there, because I still feel like there's a chance, for more reconciliation, and especially if there's new leadership. I it just makes me think of Stacey Abrams. I'm here in Georgia, and I saw her interviewed by Stephen Colbert like a month ago or something, and she just was such a compelling figure and a compelling person. So anyway, so that's one piece that I've been working on, and then there's a band in the UK called Brotherly, and the last record came out maybe 10 years ago, but I was a fan of that record, and they've got something coming out. They're working on something, and so they reached out to me about doing a solo.
Yeah.
It was fun. Had a good time.
Yeah. Very cool. And what has your, I mean, you said something about, you know, when you have a chance to practice, then you've been able to maybe cover some ground or be somewhat focused. I mean, you know, and you have two kids. I have one, and I know what that is. What that is like. You know what? You know, in my life, as I've taken on more responsibilities. You know, I'm a husband. I'm a dad. Those are the biggest ones, right? But administrative responsibilities at school, and you know, I'm a minister of music at a church, and other stuff that's going on, and just, you know, playing regularly, and all the different things that are happening. It sort of continues to squeeze that little sliver of time. You know, I talk to my students all the time about how you're in college now. This is going to be the most time you're going to have to practice. And so, I mean, you really have to protect your practice time and make the most of it, because after you finish school, you know, that all of that sort of academic bubble where you could just be away at school and study and be focusing on yourself and all of that stuff, that's over. Now it's about paying bills. So that's what you have to go and chase that around. And hopefully you'll still have time to practice, but it might not be able to be the primary thing, because stuff like eating and having lights to read with and stuff like that, that you know, that's more of a priority. But I'm saying that to say, or to ask you, what sorts of things are you working on right now? Like that's
a good question. And
yeah.
Challenge of this pandemic is, well, one of the challenges. I mean, because prior to this, I think if you were to ask me this question 6 months ago, I would say, oh, you know, I'm working, I warm up. I have a warm up thing, kind of thing, chromatic scale things that I'll do for 5 or 7 minutes or whatever. And then I usually get into working on tunes that I'm going to be performing. You know, like let's say it's a tune that I know, one of my tunes that I'm working on getting more comfortable on, and maybe I'll just improvise over it, but I'll improvise over it through a certain framework of, like, I'm not just playing over it freely per se, but saying, okay, I'm working on this, but I'm working on multiphonics. And I'm playing over the form, but I'm working on false fingerings. You know,
Right.
that kind of thing. So what's changed about this, of course, now there's no gigs. So prior to these, you know, with the exception of these songs that we were just talking about that I'm recording, it's like really open-ended. So what should I be doing? And that's part of the challenge, is not having just listless, if I have 45 minutes or an hour, that it's just not listless and disconnected to music. Because I think the thing that I found that's most beneficial is staying connected to music when I'm practicing. And what I mean by that is staying connected to a tune of some sort. So it's not like I'm playing, you know, random 2 5s and 12 keys and then some scale thing and then, you know, but this, it's like, no, I got to work on music, or I feel like a real disconnect emotionally, and like my skills start to dissipate. And the skills, to be specific, Sean, I mean like playing time, negotiating harmony, keeping my rhythmic language happening. So to say, what if I were to give, you know, what I mostly do when I practice, I think it is that little warm up, and then I've been playing bird heads, and I've been playing keys.
Yeah.
You know, over these tunes. So like today it was Bigfoot, you know, and I just, you know, I play at one key, I'd improvise a little bit, then move to another key, blah blah blah, and you know, in the end of that, I have improved as a musician by doing that. Playing a Charlie Parker head in 12 keys, whether it's Bigfoot or dexterity or, whatever it is, like that helps. And so I've just tried to pick some, I just, I don't know how many bird heads I've done, but I've done whatever bird heads, but then, some Joe Henderson, one or two of his tunes I've done that with. And what are some examples, like Hot House, or Con Elmo? No, maybe not. I already did call on it, but tunes like that, and where I guess for me to do that, it's kind of like all hands have to be on deck.
No,
I can't just go into autopilot if I'm playing Serenity in G flat or something. Like I have to think about it. I really gotta and I gotta play the harmony, and I have to think about it, and so I find that I get something good out of that. I don't only do that because then, I think too many days of that in a row, and I start to feel like it's maybe I'm not getting as much bang for the buck, so to speak. But that's definitely something I do consistently, given the nature of what we're into here. The other thing I'm doing is putting the metronome on and just playing, like improvising with the metronome on, so I really feel the tempo and stay connected to it, and trying to these were two things around these tunes that I was practicing to record, but I just kind of would put the metronome on and just play at that tempo for day after day after day, because I really wanted to get deep inside that metronomic, that tempo. I wanted to really feel that tempo and go through sometimes different rhythmic permutations, and to see if I could really lock it in playing double time this or whatever, and that was good. That also helps me to feel connected to music, and then it's not an abstract, so that's the challenge for me right now, I think, is finding these different tunes or writing tunes. Now I'm starting to thinking about recording some more music, and so I'm starting to work a little bit playing some of my own tunes, and improvising on them to see where that leads.
Yeah, that tunes in 12 keys, that's an oldie but a goodie.
No, it is. I heard Chris, I remember there's a great Chris part you mentioned earlier, there's a great bootleg of him, I think from a clinic, and he's playing All the Things You Are, and then, modulating, and it's so killing. It's so great, and it's an oldie but a goodie. It's something, it's something I heard my whole life, and I did here and there, I played Donny in 12 keys at one point, and, some other things, but I never went through 30 tunes. And I never did. So this is kind of giving me an opportunity to do that. Yeah.
So, and again, we sort of started in the middle and then went to the beginning and then somewhere towards the end and then back to the middle again. We've made a nice trail. That's great. It's great. I like it. It's improvised, right? Yeah. So this is great. So I was trying to think of when it was that I met you, and you brought your group to Ohio State.
Yes.
And you did a master class for our students. And I'm trying to think of who was in the band. I think the guitar player was Ben Monder.
Yeah, I'm going to guess it's Ben Monder, Antonio Sanchez on drums.
Yep.
Splavishnik on bass.
Yes. And I think maybe that was it 2012?
Could have been.
So I'm looking at some dates here. In 2017 would have been too recent.
Yeah.
So I think it would have had to be in 2012.
Okay.
Man, and it's interesting because it seems like it was more recently than that. and for some reason, but I know that it wasn't. And I mean, your playing was great. Your interaction with the students was great. I loved that you talked about, so one thing that I have noticed with sometimes artists, won't be honest. They won't tell you like what they actually did, to access, their ability or whatever, to unlock their ability. And then on the sort of, we were talking about this whole, our country's original sin and things. One thing that I've seen quite often is players that they know good and well that they have been feeding from certain players, but they won't say those players. The list of players that they come up with are players that, I'll just say it, that aren't black players. Yeah. They'll come up with some obscure list of players that they dealt with, and that's always very disappointing. It's not honest, and it almost makes you wonder why folks would do that. But in your case, you said, I mean, you Charlie Parker. I mean, you were saying all of the names of the players, and you really went through your process, learning how to play certain things in 12 keys, taking lines and working them out. I mean, you had several points that you made that I thought were the right things at the right time for those students. So I was really impressed by that. And then I was also very impressed because we connected after that, and you actually shared some of your charts with me, which was very cool because it saved me a lot of transcribing time. I appreciated that. But anyhow, is there maybe a final word that you have? That something you'd like to say?
I would say that it's just, just you were talking about that, and it just made me think of like Joe Henderson, and hearing him. He lived in San Francisco when I was in Santa Cruz as a kid, and Brad Hecht, who I mentioned, who I studied with, was studying with Joe Henderson, and would talk about it when I meet him in the lessons. And when I would meet Brad, he would talk about what it was like studying with Joe Henderson and Sonny Rollins, and I don't know. There's something so incredible about those guys, and I don't know. Playing these Charlie Parker heads, as I was talking about, it was just an incredible thing. It's an incredible thing to be involved in playing music, and there's such a history, and there's so much deep culture, and I don't know. I don't know if I even have a point, but I guess it's all with the pandemic too. None of us knows what it's going to look like when we come out on the other side, and it's probably not going to be a specific date, and then it's okay, and gigs are all going to happen again. There's the vaccine, and how long that's going to take for people to feel comfortable going out, and then what's the infrastructure going to look like. I mean, I think for all of us, I think we can take solace in knowing that people love live music and are drawn to it. And the Zoom gigs and all that stuff, that's cool and everything, but I think people are going to yearn for the live music experience, and for musicians, it's going to be holding tight and making do until that really opens up again. And it's a struggle. It's going to be really hard, I know, but I think there is hope, and there's all this incredible music that we have learned from, and whose the giants whose shoulders we sort of stand on, so to speak, and it'll continue. It's a sobering thought about how it's going to continue. And then and in a moment, and I think, well, if it doesn't continue, I am grateful for the moments that I've had, the moments of hearing these great musicians live, and like Elvin Jones, when I was 12 years old, and then meeting him backstage, with his wife, and I was 12, like I just got my first John Coltrane record, like I didn't know anything, but it was just incredible to meet him, and he was gracious, and then seeing him at the Monterey Jazz Festival with his band some years later with Dizzy, and he was killing, man. It was sweating and playing, and it was so intense. And I remember seeing Wynton and Brantford at that festival when it was like Wynton's first big tour with like Tane, and it was so killing. I don't know, all those experiences. I guess I'm just feeling grateful, for all the music I've heard that's changed my life, and all these different experiences, and the few musicians I mentioned here, and there's just so many more that and so many more experiences like I know you've had, and so all of us that are in this thing, we do it because we love it, and we feel called to it, and it feels like this is what we do. And it's not like you do this on a rational business. I'm looking at the business model and I'm doing it because I'm going to make however many figures. It's not that kind of a decision, right? We do this passion thing, and it's a calling, and it's something that we go into, I think, with kind of all of our heart and soul, and then I think about Thelonious Monk and his life, and well, I can keep going on and on. So but so many people have struggled to make their art, and then we're just honored to be a part of it, and to be inspired by it, and to have it affect our lives, and to try to affect other people's lives by carrying that thing. I guess so. Here's my final thought. Is I remember reading a book about John Coltrane when I was a teenager, and I think there was this idea of him imagining sending this sort of blanket of kind of like love and into the audience, and covering the audience with it, or something like that. I remember vaguely, and I remember thinking as a 14-year-old kid, like that's what I'd like to do, something like that with my life. That's something worth living for, to affect people with that kind of love and compassion and acceptance, and to have your music reflect that. That's something worth living for, and worth fighting for. So I'm grateful to have been able to participate in it, for this long.
Yeah, and me too. And I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful that you have that passion for this music, and I pray for the day that we'll be back on the stage, playing for an audience. And I believe it will happen. It may be, somewhat different, and it may take a while to get back there. But I think with the significant dent that you've made, people are going to be clamoring for Donny. They'll be clamoring for you. I know that I am. I can't wait. And actually, even this thing that you said that you're recording now, or you're finishing up now, I can't wait to hear that. I know that's going to be terrific.
Out soon. It should be out hopefully in a week or two or something. I think we're almost there. So
that's great. Well, God bless you and your family, and thank you so much for your time and energy.
My pleasure. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. Great to see you.
All right, man. God bless.
God bless.